Welcome to Sinister States.
I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd end up telling a story like this. I always figured those wild tales you hear online about secret rooms, hidden doors, and things that go bump in the night were just that, stories. Urban legends, creepypasta, the kind of thing you listen to with the lights off and a bowl of popcorn, then forget about by morning. But I'm not the same person I was a month ago. Not after what happened in this house. Not after I found the door. Let me back up. My name's Jamie. I'm 28, single, and until recently, I was living in a cramped apartment above a laundromat in the city. I worked a job I didn't care about, spent my evenings scrolling through social media, and told myself that someday, I'd get out. Someday, I'd find a place of my own, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could breathe. I didn't expect that someday to come so soon, or in the way it did. It started with a phone call. My uncle, who I hadn't seen in years, passed away suddenly. He was a bit of a recluse, the kind of guy who kept to himself, didn't have much family, and lived in a big old house out in the middle of nowhere. When the lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited the place, I thought it was a joke. But it was real. The house was mine, free and clear. All I had to do was pack up my life and move in, and I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The first time I saw the house, it was just after sunset. The sky was bruised purple, the air thick with the smell of rain. The house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by trees that looked like they'd been there since the dawn of time. It was bigger than I expected, 3 stories, with a wraparound porch and windows that stared out like empty eyes. The paint was peeling, the roof sagged in places, and the yard was a mess of weeds and overgrown grass. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a place to call home. I spent the first few days cleaning. The inside was just as neglected as the outside. Dust thick enough to write your name in, cobwebs in every corner, and a smell that was equal parts musty and sweet, like old books and rotting fruit. I found boxes of my uncle's things in the attic, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and a collection of clocks that all seemed to be stuck at different times. There was something about the house that felt off. Not haunted, exactly, but like it was holding its breath, waiting for something that I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just nerves, the stress of moving, the loneliness of being in a new place. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. That IT started with the noises. At night, when the wind died down and the world went quiet, I'd hear things, soft creaks, the sound of footsteps on the floor above me, the faint whisper of voices I couldn't quite make out. I'd get up, check the locks, walk through the house with a flashlight, but I never found anything. I told myself it was just the house settling, the old pipes, maybe a raccoon in the walls. But deep down, I knew it was something else. The first real sign that something was wrong came about a week after I moved in. I was in the basement trying to fix a leaky pipe when I noticed a draft. It was strange. There were no windows down there, and the only door was the one that led back upstairs. But I could feel it, cold air brushing against my skin, coming from somewhere behind the wall. I started tapping on the bricks, listening for a hollow sound. Most of the wall was solid, but in one spot, near the far corner, the sound changed. It was subtle, but it was there, a faint echo, like there was something on the other side. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling for a seam, a crack, anything that might give me a clue. That's when I found it, a small, almost invisible line running vertically from floor to ceiling that I pressed on it. And to my surprise, the wall shifted. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, but enough to tell me it wasn't as solid as it looked. My heart was pounding. I grabbed a screwdriver from my toolbox and started prying at the seam. It took some work, but eventually, the bricks gave way, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough to slip through. Behind the wall was a door. It wasn't like any door I'd ever seen. It was old, older than the rest of the house. made of dark wood that looked almost black in the dim light. There was no handle, just a small, circular indentation in the center. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the grooves, the roughness of the wood. It was cold to the touch, colder than the air around it. I should have stopped there. I should have sealed the wall back up, walked away, and never looked back. But I couldn't. Something about the door called to me, a pull I couldn't explain. I went back upstairs, grabbed a flashlight, and returned to the basement. I pressed my palm into the indentation, and the door swung open with a low, groaning sound. The air that rushed out was colder still, carrying with it a smell I couldn't place, earthy, metallic, and sharp, like old blood and wet stone. Beyond the door was a staircase, narrow and steep, leading down into darkness that I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But curiosity got the better of me. I took a deep breath, clicked on my flashlight, and started down the stairs. The steps creaked under my weight, each one sounding louder than the last. The walls were made of rough stone, damp to the touch, and the air grew colder with every step. I counted as I went, 10, 20, 30 steps, until I reached the bottom. The room at the end of the stairs was small, barely big enough to stand in. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with jars of murky liquid. Some of the jars held what looked like herbs. Others had things I couldn't identify, twisted shapes, bits of bone, things that looked like they belonged in a museum of oddities. In the center of the room was a table, and on the table was a book that I approached it slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The book was old, the cover cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and the words inside were written in a language I didn't recognize. The letters twisted and curled, forming shapes that seemed to move when I looked at them too long that I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of it. Some of the pages had drawings, strange symbols, diagrams of circles and lines, sketches of creatures that didn't look quite human. There were notes in the margins, written in a shaky hand, some in English, others in that same strange script. One note caught my eye. It was written in red ink, the letters jagged and uneven. Do not open the door. Do not wake what sleeps. I felt a chill run down my spine. I closed the book and backed away from the table. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing in on me from all sides. I turned to leave, but as I reached the stairs, I heard something, a soft, shuffling sound, like footsteps on stone that I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the shelves, the jars, the table with the book. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and slammed the door shut behind me. I pressed my back against it, gasping for breath, listening for any sign that something was following me. But the basement was silent. I stood there for a long time, trying to calm down. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, the nerves, the darkness playing tricks on me. I went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and tried to forget about what I'd found, but I couldn't. That night, I dreamed of the door. I saw it in my mind, looming out of the darkness, the strange symbols from the book glowing faintly on its surface. I heard whispers, voices calling my name, telling me to come back, to open the door again. That I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I told myself it was just a nightmare, but the feeling lingered. I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The next day, I tried to go about my life as usual. I cleaned, unpacked boxes, made a grocery run into town. But everywhere I went, I felt on edge, like I was being followed. People in town looked at me strangely when I mentioned the house. One old man at the hardware store asked if I was the new owner of the Blackwell place. When I said yes, he just shook his head and muttered something under his breath. That night, the noises in the house got worse. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom, the sound of something scratching at the walls. I got up, checked every room, but found nothing. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door dot on the third night. I woke to the sound of someone whispering my name. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The voice was coming from the basement. I grabbed my flashlight and crept downstairs. The basement was cold, the air thick with the smell of earth and stone. The hidden door was still closed, but I could hear the whispers coming from the other side that I pressed my ear to the wood, trying to make out the words. They were faint, muffled, but I could just barely hear them. "Jamie, let us out. Jamie." I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The voices grew louder, more insistent, until they were shouting, screaming my name. I ran upstairs, locked the basement door, and pushed a chair in front of it. I sat there all night, listening to the voices, too afraid to move. By morning, the voices were gone. The house was silent again, but the damage was done. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and drove into town. I found a motel on the edge of town and checked in. I spent the day trying to convince myself I was losing my mind, that it was all just stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was something in that house, something behind that door, and it wanted out. I called the lawyer, told him I wanted to sell the house. He told me it wouldn't be easy. There were rumors about the place, stories that went back decades. People said it was cursed, that bad things happened to anyone who lived there. I didn't care. I just wanted out. But that night, as I lay in the motel bed, I heard the voices again. Faint at first, then louder, until they filled the room. "Jamie, come back. Jamie." I covered my ears, tried to block them out, but they wouldn't stop. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that it wasn't the house they were attached to. It was me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door, the darkness behind it, the shifting shapes that seemed to move just out of sight. The voices pressed in on me, whispering, pleading, sometimes laughing in a way that made my skin crawl. I tried everything: music, TV, even calling an old friend just to hear a normal voice, but nothing drowned them out. By dawn, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, trying to make sense of what was happening. I thought about calling someone, my parents, the police, maybe even a priest, but what would I say? "Hi, I think I've been cursed by a hidden door in my dead uncle's house." I could already hear the disbelief in their voices, the awkward silence that would follow. No, this was something I had to deal with myself. I checked out of the motel as soon as the sun came up. The woman at the front desk gave me a strange look, like she could see the fear in my eyes. I tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. I got in my car and drove, not sure where I was going, just needing to put distance between myself and the house. But the farther I drove, the worse the voices got. They echoed in my head, bouncing off the inside of my skull, growing louder with every mile. "Jamie, you can't run. Jamie." I pulled over on the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I screamed, just to hear my own voice, to remind myself I was still real. The voices faded for a moment, replaced by a ringing silence that was almost worse. I sat there, shaking, until the sun was high in the sky. Eventually, I turned the car around and headed back toward town. I didn't want to, but I knew I couldn't outrun this. Whatever was happening, it was tied to me now. I had to face it. I stopped at a diner on the edge of town, hoping a hot meal and some coffee would help clear my head. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an old woman reading a newspaper in the corner. I took a seat by the window and tried to look normal. The waitress came over, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile. She poured me a cup of coffee and asked if I was new in town. I hesitated. then told her I'd inherited the old Blackwell house. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "You be careful out there," she said quietly, glancing around as if someone might be listening. "That house, it's got a history." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she was already moving away, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. I sat there, staring into my mug, wondering how many people in this town knew about the door. How many had heard the stories, or maybe even seen something themselves. After breakfast, I drove to the local library. If there were answers to be found, I figured that was as good a place as any to start. The building was old, the kind of place that smelled like dust and old paper, with creaky wooden floors and shelves that stretched up to the ceiling. I found the local history section and started digging. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, about the Blackwell house. Stories of disappearances, strange noises, unexplained accidents. One article from the 1950s mentioned a family who moved in and left less than a month later, refusing to talk about what had happened. Another, from the 1970s, described a series of break-ins where nothing was stolen, but the intruders left behind strange symbols drawn in chalk on the basement walls. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. There were rumors of secret societies, occult rituals, even a supposed cult that had used the house as a meeting place decades ago. Most of it sounded like small-town gossip, but there were enough details that matched my own experience to make me nervous that I found a reference to a man named Arthur Blackwell, my uncle's grandfather, apparently, who was rumored to have been involved in esoteric practices. The article didn't go into detail, but it mentioned a sealed room in the basement, a place never meant to be opened. My skin prickled as I read those words. I spent hours in the library, poring over every scrap of information I could find. By the time I left, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I sat in my car, staring at the house on the hill, silhouetted against the fading light. I knew what I had to do. I drove back to the house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The driveway was overgrown, the trees casting long shadows across the yard. The house looked even more imposing in the twilight, its windows dark and empty. I parked by the porch and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. The voices were quieter now, almost expectant, like they were waiting for me to make a move. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and headed inside. The house was cold, the air heavy with the scent of dust and old wood. I locked the door behind me and made my way to the basement. The steps creaked under my weight, each one echoing in the silence. I reached the bottom and stood in front of the hidden door. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought about the warning in the book, "Do not open the door. Do not wake what sleeps." But it was too late for that. I'd already opened it once. Whatever was behind it was awake now, and it wanted something from me. I pressed my palm into the indentation, and the door swung open with a groan. The air that rushed out was colder than before, carrying with it that same metallic, earthy smell. I shone my flashlight down the stairs, half expecting to see something waiting for me at the bottom. But the room was empty. Just as I'd left it, I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the stone floor. The jars on the shelves seemed to shift in the light, their contents moving in ways that didn't make sense. I tried not to look at them too closely. I made my way to the table and picked up the book. This time, I was determined to understand it. I flipped through the pages, searching for anything that looked familiar. I found more notes in the margins, some in English, others in that strange script. One page caught my eye, a diagram of the door, with symbols drawn around it. There were instructions, written in shaky handwriting. To seal the door, the blood of the opener must be given. The circle must be unbroken. The words must be spoken in the old tongue. I stared at the page, my mind racing. Was this some kind of ritual? A way to close the door for good? I didn't know what the old tongue was, but I figured it must be the language in the book. I traced the symbols with my finger, trying to memorize their shapes that I looked around the room, searching for anything that might help. On one of the shelves, I found a small knife, its blade stained with something dark. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. My reflection stared back at me from the blade, eyes wide and afraid that I took a deep breath and pressed the tip of the knife to my palm. The pain was sharp, but I forced myself to go through with it, letting a few drops of blood fall onto the floor. I used my finger to draw a circle around the door, copying the symbols from the book as best I could. When I was done, I stood in the center of the circle and opened the book to the page with the instructions. I tried to sound out the words, my voice trembling. Eldra Vasum, Nira Talek, Sivandoran. The air in the room seemed to vibrate, the temperature dropping even further. The jars on the shelves rattled, their contents swirling. The door began to pulse, the wood shifting and twisting as if it were alive that I kept reading, forcing the words out even as my throat tightened. The light from my flashlight flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness. I could feel something moving in the shadows, pressing against the edges of the circle. I finished the last word, my voice barely more than a whisper. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once, the door slammed shut. The air rushed out of the room, leaving me gasping for breath. I collapsed to the floor, my head spinning. The darkness pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. I crawled toward the stairs, my hands shaking, and pulled myself up one step at a time. When I finally reached the top, I slammed the hidden door shut and pressed my back against it. The house was silent, the voices gone. I sat there for a long time, too afraid to move. Eventually, I made my way upstairs and collapsed onto the couch. I must have fallen asleep, because when I opened my eyes, the sun was shining through the windows. For the first time in days, the house felt normal. The air was warm, the silence peaceful. I thought it was over. I thought I'd sealed the door, ended whatever curse had been placed on the house. I spent the day cleaning, trying to put the whole thing behind me. I even called the lawyer and told him I'd changed my mind about selling. Maybe, I thought, I could make this place a home after all. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a knock at the door. It was soft, barely more than a tap, but it sent a chill down my spine. I froze, listening. The knock came again, louder this time. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept downstairs. The front door was closed, the porch empty. I opened the door and looked out into the night. The yard was still, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I was about to close the door when I saw it. A small, dark shape at the edge of the porch. It was a cat, black as midnight, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It stared at me for a moment, then darted off into the shadows. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish for being so scared. I closed the door and went back upstairs, telling myself it was just a stray. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I dreamed of the door again that night. This time, I saw myself standing in front of it, the symbols from the book glowing on the floor. The door was open, and something was waiting on the other side, a shape made of shadows, its eyes burning like coals. It reached out to me, its fingers long and thin, and I woke up screaming. The next morning, I found the cat sitting on the porch. It meowed at me, rubbing against my legs as if it had always belonged there. I let it inside, grateful for the company. I named it Midnight. For a while, things seemed to go back to normal. The voices were gone, the house felt safe. I started fixing up the place, painting the walls, clearing out the yard. Midnight followed me everywhere, always watching, always alert. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch him staring at the basement door, his fur bristling, his tail twitching. He'd hiss at nothing, his eyes wide and unblinking. I tried to ignore it, But the feeling of being watched never really went away. One evening, as I was making dinner, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the moon outside. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check the fuse box in the basement. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it, a faint whisper coming from behind the hidden door. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to keep moving. I checked the fuse box, flipped the switches, but nothing happened. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. I pressed my ear to the hidden door, listening. "Jamie, let us out. Jamie." I backed away, my hands shaking. Midnight appeared at the top of the stairs, his eyes glowing in the darkness. He hissed, his fur standing on end. I ran back upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I locked it, pushed a chair in front of it, and sat on the floor, clutching Midnight to my chest. The voices didn't stop. They echoed through the house, growing louder with every passing minute. I covered my ears, trying to block them out, but they wouldn't go away. I realized then that I hadn't sealed the door. Not really. Whatever was behind it was still there, still waiting, still hungry. That I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the living room floor, back pressed against the basement door, Midnight curled up in my lap, both of us wide-eyed and tense. The voices ebbed and flowed, sometimes fading to a low murmur, sometimes rising to a fever pitch that made my teeth ache. I tried to distract myself, counting the cracks in the ceiling, reciting song lyrics in my head, even talking to Midnight in a shaky whisper, but nothing helped. The house felt alive, every board and nail vibrating with the energy of whatever I disturbed. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the voices finally faded. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and slumped forward, exhaustion washing over me in a heavy wave. Midnight stretched, yawned, and gave me a look that seemed almost reproachful, as if to say, "You did this." I couldn't argue. I had opened the door. I had let something out, or at least woken it up. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed help. Real help. Not from a lawyer or a real estate agent, but from someone who understood the kind of thing I was dealing with. Someone who wouldn't laugh me out of the room or try to have me committed. I thought about the stories I'd read in the library, the rumors about cults and rituals, the old man at the hardware store who'd muttered under his breath when I mentioned the house. Maybe, I thought, there was someone in town who knew more than they were letting on. I waited until the sun was fully up before venturing outside. The air was crisp, the sky a clear blue, but the house loomed behind me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I drove into town, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, and parked in front of the diner where I'd eaten breakfast the day before. The same waitress was there, pouring coffee and chatting with the regulars. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Back again?" she asked, her voice cautious. That I nodded, sliding into a booth by the window. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "About the Blackwell house." She glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then sat down across from me. "What happened?" she asked, her tone serious. That I hesitated, then told her everything. The hidden door, the voices, the book, the failed ritual. I left nothing out, not even the parts that made me sound crazy. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with every word. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "That house, it's always been wrong. My grandmother used to tell stories about it, back when I was a kid. Said there were things in the ground, things that didn't belong in this world. People try to get rid of them, but it never worked. The house just waits for someone to open the door." I swallowed hard. "What do I do?" She squeezed my hand. "You need to find the old caretaker. His name's Eli. He used to work for the Blackwells, back when your uncle was a boy. He knows more about that house than anyone. If anyone can help you, it's him." She gave me directions to a small house on the edge of town, just past the cemetery. I thanked her, left a generous tip, and drove out to find Eli. His house was small and tidy, with a garden full of wildflowers and a porch that creaked under my weight. I knocked, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal a man in his 70s, tall and thin, with sharp blue eyes and a shock of white hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice wary. I introduced myself, told him I'd inherited the Blackwell house, and that I needed his help. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded and stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. The inside of his house was cluttered but cozy, filled with old books, photographs, and the smell of strong coffee. He poured me a cup and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about the door, the book, the voices, the failed ritual, the cat, everything. He listened intently, his expression never changing, except for a slight tightening around his eyes when I mentioned the symbols and the words in the old tongue. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I was afraid of this," he said. "That door was never meant to be opened. Your great-grandfather built it to keep something in, not out. He was part of a group, call them what you want, cult, society, whatever, who believed there were things in this world that didn't belong. They used the house as a prison, a seal. But the seal only holds as long as the rules are followed." I shivered. "What happens if the rules are broken?" He looked at me, his eyes grave. "Then the things behind the door start to wake up. They reach out, looking for a way back into the world. Sometimes they find a host. Sometimes they just haunt the place, waiting for someone to make a mistake." I thought of the voices, the dreams, the feeling of being watched. "Is there a way to fix it? To seal the door for good?" He nodded slowly. "There is, but it's dangerous. The ritual you tried was only half of what's needed. The other half requires a sacrifice, a willing one. Someone has to stay behind, to keep watch, to make sure the door stays closed. That's how your great-grandfather did it. That's how your uncle did it, too, in his own way. The house needs a guardian." I felt a cold weight settle on my chest. "And if no one does it?" He shook his head. "Then the door opens, and what's behind it comes out." I sat in silence, the reality of what he was saying sinking in. I thought about my uncle, the way he'd lived alone, the strange things I'd found in the house. I thought about myself, alone in a place I barely understood, facing something I couldn't fight. Eli reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'll help you, but you have to be sure. Once the ritual is done, there's no going back." I nodded, my mind made up. I couldn't let whatever was behind that door get out. I couldn't let anyone else go through what I had. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Eli gathered supplies, salt, candles, chalk, a small silver bell, and a vial of something he wouldn't let me smell. He explained the ritual in detail. We would draw a circle of salt around the door, place candles at each point of the compass, and ring the bell to call the spirits. I would have to read from the book, but this time, Eli would help me with the pronunciation. The final step would be the sacrifice, not blood, but a promise. A vow to keep watch, to never leave the house unguarded. As the sun set, we drove back to the house. Midnight followed us inside, his tail high, his eyes alert. The house felt different, the air charged with anticipation. We made our way to the basement, carrying the supplies in silence. Eli drew the circle of salt, placing the candles at each point. He handed me the book, opened to the page with the ritual. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded that he lit the candles, one by one, then rang the bell. The sound was clear and pure, cutting through the heavy air. I began to read, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as Eli guided me through the words. The air in the room grew colder, the shadows deepening. The jars on the shelves rattled, their contents swirling. The door began to pulse, the symbols on its surface glowing faintly. I finished the last line, and Eli stepped forward, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Now," he said, "make your vow." I closed my eyes and spoke, my voice steady. "I vow to keep watch, to guard the door, to never let what's behind it escape." The room shuddered, the air crackling with energy. The door glowed brighter, then slowly faded, the symbols dimming until they were barely visible. The voices fell silent. Eli let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. "It's done," he said. "For now." We made our way back upstairs, the weight of what we'd done settling over me like a blanket. Midnight followed, rubbing against my legs, purring softly. Eli stayed with me that night, sleeping in the guest room. I lay awake, listening to the silence, waiting for the voices to return. But they didn't. The house was quiet, peaceful. In the morning, Eli made breakfast, and we sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. He told me stories about the house, about my family, about the things he'd seen over the years. I listened, grateful for the company, for the knowledge that I wasn't alone. Eventually, Eli had to leave. He gave me his phone number, told me to call if I ever needed help. "Remember your vow," he said as he left. "The house needs a guardian. As long as you keep watch, the door will stay closed." I nodded, watching as he drove away, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. The days that followed were quiet. I settled into a routine, cleaning, fixing up the house, exploring the grounds with midnight at my side. The voices didn't return, and the house felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted, but I never forgot my vow. Every night, before I went to bed, I checked the basement door, made sure the circle of salt was unbroken, the candles ready to be lit. Midnight would sit beside me, his eyes fixed on the door, as if he understood the importance of our vigil. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring at the door for long stretches, his ears twitching, his tail flicking back and forth. I wondered if he could sense things I couldn't, if he was guarding me as much as I was guarding the house. That I started keeping a journal, recording everything that happened, every strange noise, every odd feeling. I wanted to make sure that if anything changed, I'd be ready. I also wanted to leave a record, in case someone else ever found themselves in my position. Weeks passed, then months. The house became a home, a place of peace rather than fear. I made friends in town, invited people over for dinner, started to build a life. But I never let my guard down. I knew that the door was still there, that the things behind it were only sleeping, not gone. One night, as I was writing in my journal, I heard a soft knock at the door. Midnight perked up, his ears swiveling toward the sound. I got up, heart pounding, and opened the front door. Standing on the porch was a young woman, her eyes wide with fear. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her clothes rumpled, her hair tangled. "Please," she whispered, "I need your help. There's something in my house, something I can't explain." I looked at her, then back at Midnight, who meowed softly, as if urging me to listen. I stepped aside, letting her in. As she crossed the threshold, I realized that my story wasn't over. The door might be closed, but the world was full of hidden places, of secrets waiting to be uncovered. And sometimes, the only thing standing between the darkness and the light is someone willing to keep watch.